Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Zambito, and I have the pleasure of moderating this panel today of some of the best and brightest customer success minds that I know. And the topic that we're going to be discussing today is how to construct risk mitigation programs to prevent customers from churning. And so I would like to introduce the panel here before giving a little bit more context. So, Melissa, do you want to kick things off?
Hi, folks. I'm Mel Lipscomb. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Instabase.
I'm Lane Holt. I'm the Director of CX and Scale Programs at Gainsight.
And I'm Mimi Fernandez. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Beyond Booksmart, a consumer-focused company.
Great, yeah, and I'm Rob Zambito, so I am a three-time customer success leader and consultant, and I've had a few different run-ins at different companies on this topic. Some of the things that are really clear to me about this topic are that, first of all, it's probably very relevant to everybody here, I assume, right? So I'm sure we're all, especially based on what David's presentation was sharing, is that we're all deeply invested in getting ahead of customer churn in every way possible. One of the things that he said is that there's no surprise churn, right? Does anybody else use that motto? Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, let's start out with the definition. How do you define risk mitigation for your customers?
So I have a PR marketing background, and then I pivoted to customer success. And for me, it's about protecting the reputation of the company, having customers that will speak kindly about you after they leave. And how do we make sure that if they leave, we're not blocking the door, that we're keeping them as happy as possible so that the risk of them speaking negatively about you is lower, hopefully.
I like that. Where you think about the fact that they're still a person, they're still an organization that has something to say about you, right? And so when you're thinking about your risk mitigation programs, it's how to also make sure that you're preventing it. So where are you identifying it early enough to make sure you're mitigating it? But then also how are you helping that customer through the end of their contract to make sure, to your point, that they still have a good experience through the end?
So I'll go back to basics and say risk mitigation is about making sure that customers are getting the value that you committed to in the sales cycle so that you retain them, so that you can renew them and expand on the relationship.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I would add to that risk mitigation, in my mind, in my experience, it's not just a gross retention issue, which a lot of you are probably thinking about, right? You're thinking about gross retention when you think of preventing churn. But there's a huge opportunity cost too when you think about risk mitigation. That's an opportunity cost too. So if you pick up on customer churn, that's an opportunity cost to an upsell, right? Or that is probably an opportunity cost to customer advocacy too. Like, I don't know if anybody else has ever been in the position where you ask a customer if there'll be a reference and they're like, "Are you out of your mind?" But that's happened to me before. So
one of the things, Rob, that we talked about when we were discussing this before is any customer that churns to become a detractor is potentially 7 customers that you could have sold, right? Because in the sales cycle, you're either talking to customers with prospects, or there's something such as this where you're presenting and you want to make sure that they're advocating, right? And so every advocate for you is typically around 7 to 8 customers that your prospects are going to turn into customers. So every customer you lose that could be a potential advocate is also 7 to 8 customers you can gain.
It's such a good point because we think about controlling references and asking customers if they'll speak to prospects, but the reality is they're also back channeling and doing their own research, right? It's not all under our control.
Exactly.
yeah, great. So I think we can probably dive in now too on some strategies. I know that for me, when I think about risk mitigation practices, my mind actually first jumps to reactive strategies, just because I think, like a lot of people in the room, a lot of us are kind of firefighting, like David was saying. But as far as proactive strategies go, I think I'm curious just to hear from the panel, what are the primary methods that you all are currently using today and having success with, or not having success with?
I can give an example I'm in right now, so some real time. We do executive function coaching for people with ADD and ADHD. And so one of the things that we were doing was having this elaborate, long onboarding process. So we were doing hour-and-a-half intake meetings, all of this stuff. I finally got buy-in to do a phase 1 approach to really truncate that onboarding process. And we felt like faster to coach time, faster to meeting their coach. We're seeing great results. And I think that we were seeing a lot of churn in the beginning stages because they're like, it's taking me 4 weeks just to get to my coach. So it's just looking at the onboarding, I think, is the first risk mitigation I would start with.
Yeah, I would agree with that as one aspect. Is thinking like, how quickly are we getting to value, right? If the expectation is that I get to value quickly or within a week, and you find out that your time to first value is actually 4 weeks, you have a huge risk there. The other area to think about as primary drivers of risk are the value props that you've sold on. And Melissa, you touched on this a little bit in the last question, is if you are selling specific value props and you know that you have the data and you can tell that someone's not reaching that value prop, then you're gonna struggle, right? And so thinking too around what are your value props and how are you measuring if they're succeeding on them? So thinking the health of that, but then if they're not healthy, then that is also at risk.
Quick wins.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and I want to marry those two and say, I think if you have really good data on what is the typical customer journey, how much time are customers typically taking to hit each of those beats, and then you see that someone is lagging behind in onboarding or at any point along the way, that's a point to intervene. And then I think layering on top of that some of those more subjective measures. Do you have the right engagement within that account at the right levels? You could have a fantastic relationship with sort of the day-to-day operator, and that person could be telling you everything's great, and then you find out that the economic buyer doesn't see the value and isn't going to renew.
I think that's sometimes where CSMs get stuck.
Yes.
Right? The CSMs get stuck in talking to their day-to-day contact and they miss that extra layer. So making sure that you have that engagement with your economic buyer, with the decision maker, who's signing the contract, but also knowing who your influencers are. If you have a product that you need admins, then you want to make sure that that admin is influencing the decision maker. You want to also make sure that the CSM, the end users of your platform are also influencing that decision in a positive way.
Cool.
Oh, I was just going to amplify what you were saying in that looking between the lines of those emails, reading all the way through. What did the people say? What did their boss's boss say? And I think it's just so important to encourage your teams to see the holistic view of that client. You're not just best buddies with the person you're talking to every day.
Yeah, the point that I was going to make, which is related, is not being single-threaded within the account, especially. Dave spoke to this earlier, right? The person that you built a great relationship with might not be there anymore tomorrow. Do you have other potential champions within that organization? Have you gone high but also wide within the org?
I was talking to a VP of account management a couple of years ago who was struggling with this because her account managers were best friends with their contacts, and their contacts wouldn't tell them. They would be like, yeah, everything's good. When they took an NPS, they were thinking about that relationship with that person versus that company. So they were getting a lot of surprise churns because they were measuring it on one factor. I was measuring it on the relationship with the person that I have.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too, right? Not just putting it all on the account manager or the CSM, but having wide account relationships within your own organization. Do you have an executive sponsor? Have you kind of cross-threaded those relationships a little bit?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really, really great points across the board. I think the word that sticks out to me most there is the economic buyer. And I was just curious, have you all ever run into situations where you get told, oh yeah, don't worry about the economic buyer, like you're never going to talk to them, or they just completely ignore your emails? I'm curious how you deal with those situations. How do you get on the radar of someone who wants nothing to do with you?
Yeah, well, our buyers are often caregivers and parents, and so the payer. I look at them as a payer. I have a tech background, working in less tech first company, but I think for us, the looking at the payer, what are their pain points, and it might be as basic as I just want my kid to have his backpack ready at the back door when I'm ready to go. And, and then you have to tell the coach, this is the focus for this week. So one of the things that I think with the buyer that we have to keep focused on is, are we having direct contact with them? Are they looking at our emails? Are they opening them? Are they responding? And if I don't, it's a blind spot. And we actually have that situation with the relationship people who are in front of them maybe every 90 days, every 120 days, and that person leaves. So we've been consolidating, and trying to get as close to that pair, close to that buyer as we can, so there's no blind spots.
One thing that we found really helpful is having a common terminology across the organization. So we talk about above the line and below the line, some Skip Miller sales trainings in there, and thinking about, is the person that I'm talking to below the line, which means they are not going to sign this? Is the person that I'm talking to above the line, they are going to sign it? Or are they kind of on the line, right? They are on this line of they influence it, but they're not really that decision maker. And so by having that common terminology across your organization, we're able to say, like, okay, are you talking to someone who's below the line? And the person it gives them a moment to take a step back and not be like, oh, this is my main point of contact, but, oh yes, you're right. I am talking to someone who can't actually sign this. And so then it's be able to open up those doors, and then we're able to say, okay, do we need to bring in an executive on our side? Do we need to create some sort of moment where we have an exec reach out, talk to the person, and start to build that relationship, right? To become multi-threaded throughout the organization, and also make sure that not just one person on our side is multi-threaded, but our whole organization is.
Yeah, and I think to jump onto that, the other thing that I've seen be really effective is if you've only got that lower level contact, can you make them a hero, get some wins, make sure that you're getting all the intel on what are that economic buyer's priorities, what are the strategies that the company's really focused on in the coming year? Can you connect the dots between the work you're doing with your contact and that bigger picture? And then that can be a way to get the foot in the door, bring along a leader or an executive from our side, and then you start to open the door to that more senior contact.
One of the ways I love to do that is trumpeting successes in EBRs. Yes. So if you're struggling to get that economic buyer in, you're probably going to have a better ability to bring them in a business review. And then you bring your business partner from your customer along, and you say, what are the wins that you want to shine on? And letting them present and say, this is the success that I've had, and helping them elevate themselves in that organization.
One thing that we've done, sometimes you have an executive who says, oh, I'm too busy, I can't sit through a 2-hour EBR. We say, great, we're going to bring our C-level exec or VP. You come for the first 15 minutes, we're going to do an executive summary, and then we're going to let the next level down do a lot of planning about what we're going to do next. And often you'll get somebody to bite on that.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I think there are two things that stood out to me there. One was the concept of above the line and below the line. That was a new concept for me, so I really appreciate learning that from you. But then I think also the multi-threaded approach. That's a term that I think I've done that without knowing the term for it. And one of the interesting things is that kind of throws a loop in projects like health scoring and analytics. And in a lot of customer organizations that I've worked with, you can have health scores that show the customer is super successful, but turns out the economic, the threads that matter, so to speak, are actually based off of different, they're not captured by the health score, right? Your health score could be based on all these end users. Your economic buyer is not really captured there.
That's why we encourage organizations to have an engagement score. How am I engaging with this organization? Am I engaging with the right personas at the right cadence, right? So am I engaging with the economic buyer? Am I engaging with our champion, our admin, our end users? And each of those might have a different cadence, but then you can tell, right? And the reason why we start to look at that is because if you're looking at just the persona, like this person here, that economic buyer in our landscape right now is changing. Organizations are creating more reorgs or shifting focuses. And so in the past where a CCO might be a buyer, now maybe the CRO is a buyer or the CMO. And if you are only looking at the persona that names a specific type of role, you're not connected at the right levels.
Yeah, how else does everyone use health scores in risk mitigation today?
I do not trust health scores. I have them. I have a lot of people in green right now, and we just did a recent survey of we got about a 27% response rate, and I had a lot of fives. 1 out of 5, and I had a lot of fives, and I was like, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. So we're really focusing on the people we're not hearing from. So it's so great that we heard from them. We did kind of a raffle just to make sure we got those survey results. 27% was the highest we've ever gotten. But having that healthy paranoia, I think, is really important, and really honing in on the people that you're not hearing from.
I agree. Non-engagement is really critical. And then I think also holding yourself accountable to go back and say, where did we lose a customer that we thought was green? Where did a customer that was red renew? What can we learn from that? How can we revise and iterate on our processes and incorporate that data back into our health scoring so it gets better?
I like a few aspects of a health score, right? You don't want to have one score that's just this is
Agreed.
someone's opinion. It's not gonna be successful. You're not gonna trust it, and it's gonna become stale, especially if someone has to update it. So the way I like to look at it is what type of usage data can we have? I know that we don't always have usage data across all products, right? But in a SaaS industry, we're moving more towards that. More organizations have that data already somewhere within their organization. So how can I tell how people are using the platform? Are they logging in? Are they using the features that we expect them to use based off of their use case? But then also layering in why they buy. Yes. Is there an outcome that they're trying to move towards? That's probably one of the reasons they bought. So how can we help measure that aspect of the health score? So if you have different pillars that you sell on, maybe you have 4, having a health score that matches each of them. If you sell very much on the fact that you guys have the best support organization in the world, you better be measuring their support engagement and satisfaction. Because if not, and they've purchased you for that and their satisfaction is low, that's a churn risk. And so measuring those different pillars with the data that you have, layering in some art around like what's the sentiment, what do I feel about it, but then a lot of the science too. And then going back and measuring and saying those customers that churned, did their health score predict that they would churn? 6 months prior, 3 months prior, you might find a sweet spot. Some organizations find that 3 months prior to a renewal, that customer is already out the door. So their health data is already wrong, or it looks like it's green because it's kind of normalized based off of their usage. So trying to identify, is it 6 months, is it 3 months, where's the sweet spot? It's gonna be different for different organizations. And that's why I encourage organizations to reevaluate your health score periodically. Not every month, right? Maybe as you first started up, you need to look at it every couple months. But if you're changing your thresholds every month, you're not going to have an accurate picture. You're not going to be able to forecast. But maybe every 6 months going back and saying, okay, was this right or wrong? Every quarter at least going back and saying, like, how did we do? And then maybe every 6 months to a year, changing those thresholds, adjusting them to make sure that you are becoming more predictive in that health score, making sure you're measuring the right things. You might also find that you have a new data source this quarter that's really going to help you predict that.
That's great.
One of the things that we've instituted is bringing our sales team and our customer success teams together more. What are you selling? What are you saying? What are you hearing? So that we can make sure we're delivering on that conversation. And there's misalignment often, that they didn't understand or new person comes in. So having just a great relationship with your sales team.
Love it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes this even more complex that we were talking about in preparing for this conversation is that this can vary by customer segment, right? And so like when I was listening to David's presentation before, I was thinking to myself that, when customers shift between segments, it can really throw you off. So I was curious just to get people's thoughts on how do you vary your risk mitigation strategies by segment when you're looking at, for example, everything from quote unquote tech touch, dirty word, all the way to enterprise.
I have one of the tactics that we've done that I love that David brought up, but is risky, is how are we celebrating their progress and maybe even reducing their contract? It does mitigate that churn if we notice they're not using one of our services. I think it's just so important to have that option on the table. I think also growing your toolbox of options. What else could I offer these clients? What education services or learning opportunities or conferences or whatever? How can I engage them more and bring them to me versus just saying they're utilizing our service, they're meeting every week or whatever it is, and then trying to see how we can offboard them even in a softer way.
I have lots of opinions. Coming from a world of scale, my job is to help all of our customers be successful, right? And so when we think about segmentation and how we measure it, it's gonna be different, right? If you have organizations that have thousands of licenses to your product, and you want them to be using 95% of them to be green for utilization, but you also have a customer who has 5 licenses, 95% is not actually possible. It's either 100% or it's 80% or it's lower, right? And so being able to think about that too, your thresholds might change within the segments, but you're still measuring the same things, right? I'm measuring utilization, I'm measuring feature use, I'm measuring my engagement. And so your metrics stay the same, but your thresholds change. And that helps define whether or not they're healthy or not as well. Because if you have thousands of users, you're trying to make sure that they all log in. That's my team's goal. My team's goal is to make sure that everyone who logs into the platform logs back in the next time, right? But as a CSM, they can't always go in and say, hey, Jessica, you logged in for the first time yesterday. Let me go do this training for you. That's my team's job, right? And so how do I support those? So looking from a scale perspective, are we helping our customers? Are they leveraging the things that we give them? Are we also identifying how they want to work with us? And so we measure things the same. We have all the same health scores, but the thresholds become different.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I also think that from my experience, you do a lot more human intervention at the top, right? So there is more of the full court press across the whole account team, bringing in executives. But I think something that's really important as you look at your segments is really understanding profitability, because not all churn is bad. If you churn a customer that you're underwater on, that might not be a bad thing, right? And so understanding the profitability, particularly for those high-end customers where you're investing a lot of resources to try to make them successful, if they bought on a premise that you cannot deliver on, maybe it's better just part as friends.
I think that's really important over the next couple of years,
Right.
You want to keep every customer. You want to at least keep every customer even if they churn, that they churn happily, right? And at the same time, if you are spending $50,000 to support a customer that pays $10,000 a year,
Right.
you don't necessarily want
Ask
to
me how
keep-
I know.
How do you know, Melissa?
Yeah, I've done this one a few times.
Yeah. So it's really, how do we think about that too, right? You want to make every customer feel special. You do. But how you do that is going to be different. I love Nick Maida. He's our CEO. I cannot ask him to join a call to save an account necessarily for $14,000, right? However, if that's an account that we see growing, we might try something like that. But how do I also make that customer feel special? I make that customer feel special because I know who they are. I make them feel special because I know what they're trying to achieve and how to help them get there.
And I think that's where I'm going to jump in and say, I think it's really important in segmentation that you're not just looking at current spend. You're really thinking about what is possible if I'm selling into a huge multinational corporation and they've dipped their toe in the water, but I see applicability of my product across their company, then I might invest a little bit more versus an early stage small company that has sort of a single use case and there's very little opportunity to grow that account.
I think one of the interesting things that I heard there is essentially that there are times where you have to decide when and where you're just going to cut bait and lose an account. And so I was curious, Melissa, I think you in particular had some thoughts on that. In our last conversation, you had mentioned there's a motto of, don't lose anyone, but then at the same time, there are definitely times where, especially now, we just have to proactively decide, all right, we've tried everything, we've got to let this one go. So how do you make that decision?
Yeah, from my perspective, first of all, I tell my team, don't lose alone. So David spoke to it earlier, right? Making sure that you're letting your board, your executive team understand where there's risk, that you're bringing that to the company as a whole and really getting all the help that you need. But it comes back to, what does it cost us to support this customer? Do we understand the profitability of this customer? And then there are factors where, frankly, maybe this person, you they are not treating you right as a partner. Maybe their behavior is unethical or inappropriate or not in alignment with your values. And that's another place where I would say, particularly now, and you spoke to it earlier, reputation matters. Do you want your brand associated with their brand is an important one as well.
One of the things too with that and not losing alone is creating a safe spot for your CSMs.
Yes.
For your team. Maybe it's not CSMs, but the team that you work with. One of the things that we talk a lot about at our organization is the best thing to do is to say, I have a risk. Because it then says, you're not saying I can't do this, but you're saying I need help, right? And so you're able to say early enough, and you create this environment that's safe to say, my account is at risk. There's something going on here. We need some extra eyes. I need some help on it. And so we would rather our CSMs identify risks early, raise their hand, flag the account so that we can help. The worst thing to do is we get to the point where they churn and the CSM goes, yeah, I could have told you that 6 months ago. And then there's no documentation around it. There's nothing that we see. So we want to make sure that we create this psychologically safe environment for our team to raise their hand and say, I need help.
Love it.
Yeah, and I'll just be vulnerable and talk about how I've messed up on that. But I think that we are reducing our team of customer service people who are all part-time. So that's a challenge, and trying to do that gently. But I think not jumping in soon enough. When I saw, you see some emails pass through the transom, and you're like, I don't really like how that conversation is going. I should jump in. But then I really want to trust and empower the people who are delivering on the service. So I think jumping in when your spidey sense tells you to, or you feel that there's some negativity going on, and being bold to do that early.
I love that, and one of the tools that I've tried to utilize with my team is a pre-mortem, which can you reframe, and it unlocks the ability to see what could go wrong, right? That spidey sense. And so literally, in our internal kickoff call, I will often ask, imagine that we are at the renewal point for this brand new customer a year, 2, 3 years from now down the road, and they tell us that they're churning. Why will they be churning? Mm-hmm. And often the team comes up with really insightful things that help us get ahead of that risk. Now that we've kind of identified it and called it out, we can go ahead and start mitigating for it.
We actually do that too. We use Mirror Board, which has been really helpful. It's just giving everybody space from all levels to just put on there what they think the risk is.
Yeah.
And just having that open conversation. But opening up the conversation is really great.
One of the questions I love to ask in transitions, so whether it's coming out of onboarding or from CSM to CSM, is there's actually 2 questions. What's the biggest risk with this account, and what's the biggest opportunity?
Love it.
Right? And that's also something that when we're helping our execs prepare for meetings, one of the things that they ask us is, what's the worst thing that can happen in this meeting? And then what's the best possible outcome from this meeting? And so that helps balance you too, where you're not always focusing on, oh my goodness, everyone's focused on what can go wrong, but also that opportunity. And sometimes when an account's coming out of onboarding, it's like the biggest risk is they don't have someone who understands this piece, right? And that can be a big risk. But at the same time, when you say what's the biggest opportunity, they're like, they have 4 teams that I can see how they can use this platform. We need to help them see that too.
Yeah, Lane, I heard you mention a couple handoffs there. One is onboarding to CSM, another is CSM to CSM. One of the ones that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow actually is sales to CS. And I've actually asked a similar question, Mel, of asking your salesperson who's always, super optimistic, all right, imagine this account churns. How and why did they churn, right? So I think that opens up a conversation about how do you align interdepartmentally with your risk mitigation strategies? How do you align sales, marketing, product, engineering, all around customer risk mitigation? Do you guys have any success with that?
And building trust with that salesperson so that they'll be honest with you after they've high-fived and yes, we got this account. What challenges did you see? What did I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry. I just wanted to know what you were saying. What was the question?
Yeah, rephrase the question.
How do you align interdepartmentally
yeah.
to prevent customer churn up front?
It's the idea of we win together and we lose together, right? And then also creating those feedback loops. So we have processes around product risk. How do we identify product risks? Who do we bring in? And it's documented so we all see it. We know how points work and what things get prioritized. So there's product risks, there's support risks, there's sales risks, there's CS risks. So we have all of the different type of risks. We have processes around it, and we know when there's a certain place in the process who to pull in. So really making sure, as you're thinking about your organizations, how do we create this cross-functional buy-in is really one of the things that we're seeing a lot in the CS industry right now. Is this idea, even more so, is it's not the CSM function is not the catch-all. Right? So how do we also bring that to within the organization, right? Because there's been years in the past where if an account churns, CS, why did it churn?
Right.
It's not always CS, right? The CSM becomes that quarterback, but they can't go build something in the product. They can't always go troubleshoot that support ticket or bridge that issue with finance. And so how do we create that cross-functional buy-in? How do we create that safety within our organization as well?
I love that. Because what I've seen sometimes on my teams is the CSM becomes the Band-Aid, and they absorb all that pain, and the rest of the company doesn't feel it. And it's for the best of intentions, right? They're trying to be the hero. They're trying to fight the fire. But in the desire to kind of do the right thing by the customer and the company, they're protecting us from recognizing something that's actually going to hurt us down the road. And I think you're right, putting in place those regular cadences where you can have those communications in a really safe place and say, hey, our product is actually really hard to use. We need to fix this within the product. This feature would make a big difference for our customers. I really like some kind of cadence of cross-functional, mid-level or above leadership, red account, risk type meeting on some cadence where the account team can bring the problems that they can't solve themselves. And it's not just the CSM or the account manager, it's the whole account team together saying, we've done everything we can do at our level. We need help from leadership. Here's the state. You help us figure out what the next best steps are to save this account.
I had the privilege of being able to be the first CS director where I am, but if you're going into a new job or if you're going into a situation, taking those moments to build those relationships, but pausing and just establishing yourself as, I'm going to tell you how it is. I'm going to tell you if you have spinach in your teeth, So I need us to have that open conversation, and that psychological safety piece is just so important from the CS side because we are absorbing so much. Celebrating those wins, having that feedback loop. The feedback loop is something that I've instituted that is just like, hey, coach, you're doing an excellent job, and here's what they said about you. I don't know why it wasn't happening before, but it gives them a boost, and we need the boost too, right?
And one thing about red accounts or risk reviews is as you're building it, take some lessons in the sense that we didn't get it right the first time. We'd have these cross-functional partners, and they're like, what is the value of me being in this meeting? Because we weren't prepared. We're like, we want to talk about these accounts. Well, why do you want to talk about these accounts? What is the ask of me? And so one of the ways that we've worked through this is we identify the accounts that we want to talk about first, and we provide a description of what's going on and the ask that we have, so that when we get to that meeting, it is a very succinct and actionable 30 minutes.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know that I've been on both sides of that before, where sometimes I'm sounding a little too like, help me, and then other times feeling too directive. So it's a tough middle line to toe. And I think that if we were going to sort of put this into an actionable next step, I'm curious to hear any specific actionable next steps that you all would recommend to the audience, either number one, to create those better interdepartmental relationships, or number two, to create an environment of safety for CSMs to talk about any at-risk accounts that they're running into.
Psychological safety starts in the one-on-one. How do I help my CSM know that I have their back, right? And so by building that trust and that relationship in that, and then showing in those other meetings that you have their back too, right? So if they get into a spot where maybe it seems like they're, at the front of the firing range, being able to, for you to step in and say, hey, here's how we can support them, and building that trust there. and then you can build it within your part of the organization, and then it branches out. Being able to be able to offline out of that meeting, go to your cross-functional partner as a leader and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. Like, how do we work better together? And so by being a leader to make your CSMs feel safety or your team members feel safety, and then also creating that vulnerability. One of the things too in building psychological safety is to be vulnerable. So how can I show that I'm vulnerable to my team as well as showing it to the other parts of the organization as appropriate, right? And so being able to say like, hey, I stepped in it before too. Like, this is what I did. This is how I came over it. This is my learnings that I got from it. And also creating that spot in the one-on-ones after those moments, say, hey, what did you learn from this? What can we change next time? And so being able to build those feedback loops starts to create that psychological safety for your team members.
Yeah, I think being the first to say that I might have made a mistake here, or maybe I will own this. I think for me, the takeaway is it's not always what everybody is saying, it's what they're hearing. And did they hear that? And did you ask the next question and the next question? So I think just being, being a little more bold in your questions, but vulnerable and supporting those one-on-one meetings are so important. It's exhausting, but we have to show up the same every day for the people we lead so that they feel like, okay, I can bring this to her.
I love all of that. I'm going to lean more on the cross-functional side. And I think two things I would say is, one, really encouraging your team to build strong cross-functional relationships with the rest of the account team, with engineering, with product, and encouraging them when they come to you with a problem, before you go solve it for them, say, hey, did you have a conversation with the AE? Or, okay, you felt slighted by the AE. Let's assume good intent. Go back and tell that person. Just be really honest with them and tell them how you felt in that meeting and talk about how the two of you can work together better. And then mimicking that at my level and building those same strong relationships with my peers.
One of the ways that I love to do that when someone's joining an organization is to ask them to go meet with someone, right? But being very specific in their next two questions that they have to ask before they wrap up that meeting. And it is, who is one person in your organization I need to meet with, and who is some person outside of your organization that I need to meet with? And if you ask those two questions in every meeting, your network within your organization grows exponentially very quickly. And so by being able to do that, you start to, from the first day in an organization, you're able to do that. And so maybe you don't have that moment where you have someone new coming in to do that, but maybe being able to say, hey, in your role this year, here's someone that I want you to talk to. Also ask them these two questions. And then also thinking about questions like, how should we work together? What's one way I can help your team? And what is a way that I should expect to be able to work with your team as well?
I worked with someone who did that on the regular, and he would ask people, how do I help you win?
Yeah, those are all really great points. We're just about done with the questions, and then we're going to open up to Q&A with the group. But I was just curious, how do you all, so considering that the topic is risk mitigation strategies, how do you all track the success of your risk mitigation strategies over time? How do you iterate on them and improve on them over time?
Well, I think that the pre-mortem is a great idea. I think storytelling is so important. I don't know that you can always measure, but I think telling those stories, my CSM just went through an exercise where she looked at the entire journey and what they said at the beginning and how they left the organization, and then flowing those stories through sales, through the service providers, and making sure that people feel the stories that they are being a part of and celebrating them.
A couple of years ago, I did an analysis of accounts that had risks. So when we created a risk CTA or a call to action, how many of them churned and how many of them stayed, right? Of those accounts that we had created risk CTAs for, 80% of them we retained.
Wow.
So by being able to say, like, here's what we did, and here's the results. So being able to track it in data, don't track it in your notebook. You want to make sure that it's trackable somewhere so that you can see that. And that's also refreshing to go back to the point earlier, is like, it is good to raise the flag early, right? So being able to say, this is what you did, this was the outcome, and it has that measurable piece too, to be able to say, we were tracking this. You can also then go back and track towards what type of risk was it, what was the playbook you did, were they more likely? So the best that you can, finding a way to track it, measure it, and then also measure the result. So not only the fact that like, a certain percent, 80% of our accounts had a risk CTA or something like that, being able to say like, they had this risk CTA and we retained them.
I love that, being able to get a little more granular on, we did this thing, and then we were able to retain them. We also do blameless postmortems. So, really set the stage and frame it up front. This is not about finger pointing. This isn't about, kind of finding the scapegoat and shaming them. It's about going through the whole narrative of, this is what happened with this customer throughout the time that we worked with them. Where should we have seen a red flag? What did we try? Did that work? Did it not work? Why didn't it work? What can we learn? I think having that kind of learner's mindset is really critical.
Yeah, those are all really great points. And so just before we open it up to the crowd, I just want to ask, any final major pieces of recommendation that you all would share with the crowd?
Churn happens, risks happen. Like, it's part of the roles that we're in. Kind of embrace it to take a learning from it.
I think that learner mindset is so important. I'm going to be talking about mindsets tomorrow, and I think really coming at this with empathy and with a curiosity.
Love that. I'm going to say customer success is the whole company's responsibility, not just the people who have customer success in their title.
Yeah, those are really, really great concluding points. So we wanted to open it up to the crowd and just hear what questions you have. I'm sure people have some thoughts on their mind. So show of hands, does anybody have question from the front?
So psychological safety was mentioned. I come from a sales background, and so I would love to know, when you use some of the words you're using, how sales reacts to it. Because I feel like if you were to do a personality score in the room, it wouldn't resonate with other cross-functional teams. Not just that word, but other words that were mentioned. It seemed a little not profit-oriented, maybe that would be. I would be interested how the VP of sales would react.
I think that's an interesting question, because I would also want my sales reps, if I was a sales leader, to be able to feel if they can tell me if there's a risk in a deal cycle, right? And so helping them be able to forecast better, right? You also want to create that safety for them to be able to say, this is going well, this is not going well, right? And so while some of the terms we use, like we use psychological safety across our organization. It's not just within CS, it's within sales, within marketing. And so I know that it's a newer term in the last couple of years, probably.
I've never heard it.
Yeah,
So
it's
I've never heard it.
Yeah, it has to come from the top, for sure.
Okay.
Well, and I think if you've got people that are skeptical about some of this stuff, helping them understand why psychological safety actually helps you be more effective as a team and deliver results and put money in everybody's pocketbook, right? You can connect those dots.
And I think that a piece, because we talked a little bit earlier, your background too, that you come from med tech, right? And so a piece of that too is there are certain industries that are not necessarily moving as fast as others. And I think that over time, I'm starting to see some things in the healthcare IT world where they're starting to pick up speed. So it's coming, those things and the different things that we're talking about here. So I'd encourage you to embrace those and take them back to your company to help you move quicker on that change.
Yeah, even in education, I'm take a lot of the things I've learned from the tech world and bringing them to the education side. So,
Other questions from the group?
Jessica has one up front.
Jess has a question up here.
Lane, I was fascinated when you were talking about having a risk CTA and then you turned it around. Can you give a tangible example of what triggers a risk CTA? I just want to crystallize that point.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that, right? You can look at, did their adoption decrease? So users logging in. It could also be things like a stakeholder change. So being able to say my buyer is someone new, right? How do we create that? So we typically see those risks around stakeholder change, product usage. David was talking about earlier, like layoffs, rifts, things like that. So how do you identify those? And it goes back to also where we were talking about earlier, the pillars that you sell on, the value. So are we not getting value? So maybe the time to value and being able to say like, oh, here's a risk because they're not actively logging into our platform or using the platform as we would expect them to, and they're 6 months of age. They're 6 months into a 1-year contract. what do we need to do now, right? And so you would, for those top 5, maybe 10 churn reasons or risk reasons, you would have a playbook that you'd be able to apply and then work through it. You're not going to have the playbooks out of the gate. You're going to have to figure out what works, but you can have a skeleton for them to be able to start tracking that.
And are you triggering those at scale, or is it also input by the CSM as they uncover this, interacting with the account?
It's both, right? Some things out of data you have. Sometimes even from stakeholder engagement, you can tell that too, right? I can get a flag from something like LinkedIn Navigator, as David said, to say, oh, this person's no longer there. How do I find my next sponsor, right? So those things you can trigger that for, depending on what systems you're using, and then also allowing the CSMs to create it themselves, right? Because they're going to see things that maybe they know before the fact that usage is going to decline, that there's layoffs coming or there's a reduction in force. So being able to identify that. And so it's a mixture of letting the system do it and also letting the CSMs do it as well.
What I love about that in this environment where we have to prove what we do, that is such a tangible way of tracking operational tasks that are so tied to the value. So I really just love that concept. Thank you for sharing it.
Of course. I think there's one in the back. If you want to speak up, we might be able to repeat it for you before the mic gets there.
You. What are some good strategic approaches that you've seen have worked for customers that have just gone dark to try to engage them again?
Oh, it can be a challenge. Thinking about who to talk to, right? Being multi-threaded, are there different people there? Some ways that we've also done it is going through the usage data and figure out who's still logging in but not talking to you, right? So that's someone that you can talk to about the value that they're getting from you. So it might be a user that wasn't in your portfolio of people to talk to. Gifts, while not necessarily easy to do at scale or programmatically, have a high impact. Like I remember there was one account that would not talk to us. We took a book and a bottle of wine and sent it to France to try and get this person to talk to us. And they did finally, but I mean, they were telling us they were returning, but at least we knew, right? And so being creative with it as well for those who go dark, that's a few things that we've done.
I mean, this is really in front of them, but texting. I've texted parents just, with my role or somebody at a high level saying, hey, we're proof of life even. Sometimes you just want to know that they're still living and breathing. But, tracking them on social media, tracking them on LinkedIn. Are they commenting and posting? Might be something wrong, so I do often assume that there is something wrong first so that you're not unempathetic to that.
Yeah, for sure. I think empathy is really important. You don't want to, pound on somebody's door and find out that they're, being treated for a chronic illness or something, right? But if you can sort of determine that there's nothing bad going on there, humor, I think, is really helpful and can often just help you relate on the human level. And this is the exact kind of thing that we would bring up in a risk meeting, right? And one of the great things about having that cross-functional group in the room, including sales leadership, is often that sales executive might say, oh, you know what? In the initial deal, I actually talked to somebody else within the org. I can go back to that person and try to kind of get a backdoor to find out what's going on. The other thing that I've done is looked at LinkedIn and seen, do we have a friend in common? Do we have connections? And I can go to that person and say, hey, well, you help me? I genuinely want to help this person be successful. It doesn't help if you're coming at it from a very mercenary standpoint. You're like, hey, I want to sell this person some more stuff. But if you say, this person has a 2-year term with us, they're 6 months in, they're not talking to us, they're not getting value, hey, can you help me help them to see the value that I can provide to them? Often that can unlock something as well.
I often use response time as a measure for myself, for the engagement of that customer. Did they reply to that email 3 days after I sent it? That's a risk.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I honestly think CSMs probably need to be just as well versed in LinkedIn as sales reps, if not better.
Yep.
And it also goes back to customer success becomes an organization's responsibility, not that CSM, because being able to say, hey, my chief product officer has a relationship with this person at this company, it can open the door, right?
Right.
and really create those relationships. And it's not where you want to go like, hey, why aren't you using our platform? You want to be able to say like, hey, I noticed that you're a customer of ours. We just want to we want to make sure, or maybe that you find out they went to college together, right? And so being able to create those relationships in different avenues than what you would traditionally think of.
It's a small world, and ultimately people do business with people at the end of the day. And so forging those human connections is important.
Those recommendations are all a lot better than a colleague of mine shared, which is just threaten to turn off the software.
That gets some attention too.
I mean,
That's
sometimes
hardball right there.
yeah, that's playing hardball. Well, I feel really, really lucky to have been part of this panel. I think I learned so much from the three of you.
One more question, if we have time.
If we have time. Do we have time?
Have to be really quick.
Really quick. All right, one-word answers only.
It's actually not a question. I just wanted to make a comment on, it was actually kind of a Hail Mary strategy that we started to, really get those customers to engage with us who just went dark. And so I don't recommend it for all of customers, but sometimes that shift in power, right? We found that a lot of times our outreach emails they became more desperate. Right, customer, I've been trying to reach you, I haven't heard, I want to talk about XYZ, and just became very long-winded. So we actually started to say, customer, I've reached out to you several times with no success, where do I go from here? And I have found so far that our response rate is like 95% on that. So, and it's very quick. So just a tip wanted to share.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists. A big round of applause for them.